Caroline Mitchell here. I'm an ex-police detective and crime thriller author, and this week I'm bringing you an update on what was the cold case of Jonelle Matthews, who disappeared from her home 36 years ago. And I'm so pleased to say that this Christmas case appears solved, and it comes with lots of twists and turns, so stay tuned to the end. So we go to Greeley in northern Colorado, which is about 50 miles north of Denver. And I'm sorry, Colorado, to return so soon, but this is a case with some really recent updates that you won't want to miss. Greeley is a population of over 100,000 people with a thriving economy rooted in food processing and agriculture. Jonelle lived in a safe neighbourhood with a strong sense of community, and nobody could have forecast what would happen next. On December the 20th in 1984, 12-year-old Jonelle Matthews lived with her parents, Jim and Gloria Matthews, and her 16-year-old sister, Jennifer. Her father was the principal of Platte Valley Elementary School in Kersey, Colorado, and that evening, just a few days before Christmas, the family were going in different directions. Gloria, Jonelle's mother, was out of state visiting her father who was ill, and Jennifer, Jonelle's older sister, was playing basketball in her high school gym. Jonelle herself was taking part in a holiday concert at the Introwest Bank of Denver as a member of the Greeley Franklin Middle School Choir. So when it was over, she asked her friend Deanne Ross if her dad wouldn't mind dropping her home. So he dropped her home at about 8:15 and waited for her to get inside before leaving. And according to the Greeley Tribune, just after 8:30, a teacher from Jim Matthews' school called, and she asked Jonelle to tell her father, who was the principal, that she couldn't make it to school the next day. And Jonelle noted this down on a piece of message board next to the phone. Now that was the last time anyone would hear from Jonelle. And she wasn't, even on her own that long. It was only an hour later at about 9:30 that night that her father noticed the garage door was open when he got home. And he went inside and he called out for his daughter, as you do, and everything looked okay except Jonelle wasn't there. The lights were on in the house, the TV was playing, Jonelle's socks were on the sofa near her shoes and her shawl where she normally sat. And her dad wondered maybe she's just popped out to a neighbour's house. So when Jennifer, Jonelle's sister, came home at 10 p.m. and said she hadn't heard from her sister, then Jim did become worried, and he called the local pastor, who was also his friend, and he advised Jim to call the police. When the police arrived, they did notice that a rake had been used to cover up footprints in the snow outside the home, which is possible someone could have been looking into the windows. But there was no sign of a struggle or forced entry in the house, and the room was set up all nice and cosy with a pillow where Jonelle liked to sit and a heater to keep her warm, and it said she'd been wearing her mum's slippers. And the house was all decorated for Christmas with Jonelle's Christmas stocking hanging on the wall. But where was Jonelle? It was as if she disappeared into thin air. Well, Greeley police took her disappearance very seriously, and they launched a massive search and immediately began knocking on doors. Jonelle's mother, Gloria, called home to say that she had arrived in California, and this is when Jim broke the news of Jonelle's disappearance, and the next morning Gloria caught a flight home. A big investigation was launched, and it even caught the attention of Ronald Reagan as he mentioned the little girl in his speech, but police were no further on to finding Jonelle, and it was such a mystery how she just disappeared that night. Detectives found out that she was adopted from a Los Angeles agency when she was just a month old, and police in Los Angeles watched her birth mother's house for 6 weeks in connection with the case, just in case she had something to do with it. And she didn't have a clue about this, and when they stopped, she still was no wiser. And Jonelle's father was also questioned many times by the police, apparently because of his calm reaction to Jonelle's disappearance. And it got to the stage where he was getting fed up of being questioned and said, "Look, I had nothing to do with it, go and find the guy who did." Well, Steve Pankey, who at the time lived 2 miles away from the Matthews family, inserted himself into the investigation right away, discussing information that no one in the public domain knew. And at the time of Jonelle's disappearance, he was 33 years old, married and a father of a young boy. He He was ex-army and a religious man. His grandfather was a pastor and his father was also a pastor, serving at Greeley's Bethel Baptist Church. But Pankey had a dark and disturbing side to him. He'd had several run-ins with law enforcement and was known to watch school children walking home from the middle school where Jonelle attended. He took an unhealthy interest in Jonelle's case over decades to come. A $5,000 reward for information leading to Jonelle's kidnapper was offered, and the search was the largest in Greeley history. Jonelle's father told Denver Post at the time, "It's not a death is final, it's a closure you can put behind you, but this is constant, it's unique, you can't work through this." Detectives worked through thousands of leads, some which came from psychics, and a girl in Lakeland in Florida strangely came forward saying that she was Jonelle. Well, she wasn't, and we don't know why she did it, but Jonelle's picture was put on flyers and sent to 4,000 stores across the country. The following May, a partial scalp was found by a farmer on his farm in the southwest Weld County, and it was a piece of skin and hair, and poor Gloria Matthews, Jonelle's mum, had the harrowing task of having to look at it, and she said she instantly knew it wasn't Jonelle's remains because the hair was the wrong colour. She said, "I wasn't really prepared emotionally to look at the scalp, but it was a job that had to be done. I felt a great sense of relief when I realised it wasn't Jonelle." But the family were losing hope that they would ever find her alive. After a year of searching, Gloria Matthews told a reporter that she believed Jonelle might be dead, but she was also scared that her daughter was being kept captive somewhere, being forced to do things that she didn't want to do. 5 years after Jonelle disappeared, tips kept coming into the police from all over the country, but they were no closer on finding the little girl. And on the 10th anniversary of Jonelle's disappearance, she was declared legally dead. Then in 1997, the Matthew family received a letter from Jonelle's birth mother, and that was a real blow because they weren't expecting it. And, she had given up her child when she was just 13, and now it seemed she wanted to meet her. "My name is Terry Vieira Martinez," the letter said. "A search consultant recently helped me locate the baby I give up for adoption." Well, after extensive effort, she said, it was found that her name was Jonelle Matthews. "I hope that your hearts will be open for a possible reunion sometime in the future." And Gloria burst into tears when she read this letter. She later said, "I was thrilled that Jonelle's mother wanted to contact her because Jonelle had always wanted that. But then I had to tell Terry that the little girl she entrusted to us was gone. I had to ask myself, could I have taken better care of her?" And the family later went on to what I can imagine was a very difficult meeting. Years passed with no major leads, and after almost 35 years after Jonelle's disappearance, on the 23rd of July in 2019, a child's remains were found by excavators as they dug in a pipeline on the county road. And it was nothing short of a fluke that they found that, just digging that particular piece of road. And DNA evidence positively identified the remains as Jonelle Matthews. Police didn't release the cause of death straight away, but it said that they were treating her death as a homicide. However, news reports did later state that Jonelle died from a gunshot wound to her forehead. In 2019, after the discovery of Jonelle's remains, the Greeley Police Department finally announced that Steve Pankey was a person of interest in her murder case. Pankey had run for governor in Idaho in 2014, again in 2018, and for lieutenant governor in 2010, and he failed at all. And a year later, in October 2020, he was arrested. And by that time, the police had collected a pile of evidence, including testimony from his now ex-wife, Angela Hicks. And it all added up to a picture of a man with a very disturbed mind. Pankey was in the same church congregation and lived about 10 miles from where Jonelle's body was found. And on the night she disappeared, Pankey lived just 2 miles from Jonelle's home. He had good knowledge of the neighbourhood that Jonelle lived in, and he had discussed a crucial detail about the Matthews house that police had kept from the public, and that's the fact that on the night she disappeared, that someone had used a rake to cover up the footprints in the snow. There were multiple reports of Pankey having money troubles, and he also had several run-ins with people in authority accusing them of conspiring against him. And there were harassment claims between him and his extended family, and a woman he knew from church accused him of raping her, but it didn't go anywhere. Pankey raised suspicions when he started inserting himself in the police investigation, giving conflicting and somewhat incriminating testimony throughout the years. And his interviews were so bizarre, but he couldn't leave the case alone. He was always putting himself out there to be interviewed about it. And he filed criminal and civil pleadings as well that contained veiled statements about Jonelle. He argued that in cases of certain rulings by the court, it's reasonable for the appellant to believe that he would get the death penalty for revealing the location of Jonelle Matthews' body. In 2003, he said that the family should be informed that Jonelle died before crossing 10th Street and not to give them hope. He also wrote that without a deal, this case will never be solved. And in all of these years leading up to 2019, when the police officially announced their person of interest, Steve kept repeatedly searching for information about Jonelle on the internet. And then he later attempted to delete all traces of those searches and admitted to it. So what was his defence? What was his alibi on the night that she disappeared? Well, he said he was away on a family trip on December the 21st and didn't even hear about Jonelle's disappearance until he returned on December the 26th. But according to his wife Angela, the family trip took place 2 days after Jonelle's disappearance on December the 22nd. And strangely, she said that Steve dumped both their family dogs before the trip and she never saw them again. During the drive, Steve listened to the radio searching for news reports about Jonelle's disappearance, which she said wasn't like him. And when they later returned home, he made Angela read out all the news stories about Jonelle from the newspapers, and then he strangely went out to the yard and began digging. Several days later, their car mysteriously burst into flames and Steve had it crushed in a salvage yard. And police also discovered that a few months after Jonelle's disappearance, Steve and Angela were attending a church service when the minister told the parishioners that Jonelle would be safely returned home. And Steve grew really agitated by this, muttering the words "false prophet" under his breath, and he got so angry that he had to be escorted out of the church. In 1999, Steve allegedly complained to Angela that the police wouldn't give him immunity for the information he had about Jonelle. And she looked at him like really confused expression and he said, "Well, you don't think I could have hurt her, do you? She looked just like you." And that's really weird. In 2008, Angela and Steve's son was shot to death by his girlfriend, and Steve was heard saying at the funeral, "I hope God didn't allow this to happen because of Jonelle Matthews." Steve Pankey then gave an interview to the newspaper Times News where he said that he was being framed by the police. He said that he was targeted for his sexuality, identifying himself as a celibate homosexual.
The deal, this may never be resolved.
Just that. Without a deal, it may never be resolved.
What kind of deal would you be looking for?
Well, not necessarily for me.
Okay.
I mean, it is. My son was murdered in 2008. A deal was made to avoid a jury trial. And that's how it's done. Deals are done all the time.
And then can you tell me why you want it to be resolved?
So it's resolved. So it's over with. So that family has the same closure that I have. Okay, that's.
And also, I mean, talk about wouldn't you like it resolved to maybe have your name cleared or?
Oh, absolutely, without a doubt.
One last thing, did you hear earlier this summer that her body was exhumed, or found, I should say?
Yes.
Northern.
Yes, I saw that online. That's a totally legal thing to do, is look online.
Yeah.
When a Greeley cops come to you and accuse you of, or want to talk to you about this, it's a pretty prudent thing to go online and check on what's the updates. So in 1989 we moved. I was married at the time. We moved to Ketchum, Idaho, and then Shoshone, Idaho. And in Shoshone, I joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And when I got the ordination and was baptized and all of that, the bishop asked me if there was anything I wanted to confess, if there was anything like bothering me that I needed to get off my chest. And I said, yeah, back when I lived in Colorado, this girl disappeared, and I had this weird conversation about it, and it bothered me. I don't think they're going to find anything, but I think they're going to leave this shadow of this appearance of evil with
Now, we don't know what his exact intentions for Jonelle were, but according to the police, he shot her in the head after deliberation in the process of kidnapping. His home in Colorado was searched under a warrant that stated investigators had probable cause to believe that Pankey abducted and murdered the girl that night. Greeley Police Commander Roy Smith stated that Pankey had made repeated efforts to speak with detectives about the Matthews case, but when they actually went to Idaho to speak to him in 2019, he refused to answer all questions. On October the 13th, authorities announced that Pankey was indicted on charges of first-degree murder and kidnapping in Jonelle's death. Pankey is 69 years old at the time of his indictment, and Jennifer, Jonelle's older sister, that said that while the family experienced some closure when they learned that Jonelle was murdered, she considered Pankey's arrest to be another gift to our family. She said she remembered Jonelle as a strong, independent, opinionated 12-year-old. She knew what she wanted, she said, and how things should be done. I'm grateful for this closure after 34 years, she said. It does bring up some old wounds and some more questions maybe of what happened, but we've received so much love and support already. And she lives in Washington State, and her parents, Jim and Gloria Matthews, are now retired and living in Costa Rica. And they did say they do plan to go back sometime soon, I guess in memory of Jonelle, just for a visit. And she said that they're grateful for all the hard work the Greeley Police Department has done. Wheel District Court Judge Timothy Kearns recently set a $5 million cash-only bond for Pankey, who was accused of kidnapping and murdering Jonelle Matthews in December 1984. The bond provisions include not allowing Pankey to leave the state without written exception, GPS tracking, no contact with any named witnesses, and no ability to acquire firearms. Well, I should think so. He was also required to surrender his passport. So while we've talked about Pankey quite a lot, I do have to say in my disclaimer that he's not actually been found guilty in a court of law for this offence yet. Indeed, his defence attorney stated that Pankey was obsessed with Jonelle's murder for whatever reason, later adding that Pankey had a true crime obsession, and he asked the court to review the indictment and consider whether there's even probable cause to suspect that Pankey murdered Jonelle. The strangest thing of all, he said, was that it appeared that Pankey wanted to be charged with a crime he didn't commit. What do you think? The evidence does seem to point to him, doesn't it? And I've seen some great videos by body language experts who believes he is guilty. And I will be watching this case closely when it goes to court, but I believe the police have found their man. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it though. And this is my last video of 2020, so I'd really like to wish you all a happy and safe Christmas and a hopeful and prosperous new year. And don't forget to give us a little like for Christmas. And remember, for every murder that we discuss, there are so many more cases of children who've been happily reunited with their families, and so many more happy and loving homes. So enjoy this holiday season, and until next time, bye bye.